Hello and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Robert Mack is an Ivy League educated positive psychology expert, celebrity and executive happiness coach, and author. Robert is one of the world's leading experts on the relationship between happiness and success. His work has been endorsed by Oprah, Vanessa Williams, and many others, and he has been featured on Good Morning America, The Today Show, Access Hollywood, E!, Cosmopolitan, Glamour, and more. Robert's first book, Happiness from the Inside Out, The Art and Science of Fulfillment, is both celebrity endorsed and critically acclaimed. Robert thrives on helping individuals and organizations achieve an energizing balance of authentic happiness and success based on time-tested techniques and wisdom. Robert Mack, it's an honor to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Thanks so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Man, it's so cool. One of the things that we left out of your intro is that I believe you've done some acting and you've done some modeling. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was a model for about 10 years and I'd done some acting there for a little while as well. I was on a short-lived TV show called South Beach, and that was fun. But yeah, I had a great time with the modeling for a while there. I mean, it's a great life, especially when you're working, but it can be a tough one when you're not.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, no, I'm telling you, like, I'm also a model, which is pretty cool. The only difference is I've never been hired. I just put it on my resume and nobody ever hires me for it. But it counts as the same, right?
Absolutely, brother. We're going to count that for sure.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. My ego really appreciates that. I'm super excited to talk with you today. You have such an interesting story, and you've got to this place of happiness where you're now sharing this message. So I want to hear about your life. Did you just grow up as a very happy person and nothing bad ever happened to you? So you just said, like, hey, I'm pretty good at being happy. I'll just do this for my career?
You know, not so much. Not so much. That's a great fairy tale of a story, and I could appreciate that. You know, my story was much more sort of nuanced than that. I grew up extraordinarily unhappy. I remember being unhappy basically at birth. Like my first memories were being stressed out and anxious and sort of self-loathing. And then over time, I always thought I would grow out of that, but that didn't exactly happen. It sort of gotten worse and worse. And despite doing well academically and athletically and, you know, pretty much all ways, I just found myself experiencing these really deep, dark episodes of depression. And then it led to suicidal ideation. I was thinking about suicide dozens and dozens of times a day, every day. And I eventually got to a place where I did some research and decided I was going to slash my wrist. Oh. So I grabbed a kitchen knife and I, shoved it into my wrist. And then I had the most unpredictable and unexpected and almost inexplicable experience, which is that without any change in my life, like in my external conditions or circumstances, I just felt this peace and love and joy that I hadn't experienced before. And it was shocking, like shocking. That's not what I expected. And so I decided to postpone the suicide for like 15 minutes. And in that 15 minutes, I started doing a little bit of research. And, the 15 minutes eventually led into an hour and then, several hours. And now I look back and it's been, over 20 years. And it's unbelievable the ways in which my life has changed since then, most notably that I've become a happiness coach, in the midst of all that. So yeah, that's my story. And it's interesting and sort of topsy-turvy, but as they say, skillful or straight roads don't make skillful drivers.
Huh, I love that. Wow, that's crazy. So how did that experience, being in those depths of unhappiness, help you today with your career? That must have been pivotal for you.
Absolutely. First and foremost, I became committed to being happy in a way that I think few people probably do, because for me, it was life and death. So it was the first thing is I began to prioritize happiness above pretty much everything else in my life. Second, I think, in the process of that, I learned to do research and to read for like purely selfish reasons that are sort of revolved around happiness, which allowed me to learn a lot from a lot smarter people. And I began to apply that in a consistent fashion. So that also helped a great deal. I tracked a lot of what I was learning in terms of happiness tips and tricks and tools. And that eventually became my book, Happiness from the Inside Out. But I think ultimately it taught me, commitment, resilience. I was always a very disciplined person, but I feel like now I'm a lot more blissciplined, which means I'm like committed to doing what it takes to be, happy and blissful. Whereas before it was like I was doing a lot of things just to get through the day or just to be successful or just to be accomplished.
That's so interesting. So you described that feeling of like peace and love as you know, you were just about to kill yourself, which is so crazy. That feeling, was that kind of a one-time thing, or did you continue feeling those same feelings after that day?
Yeah, I didn't feel it after that day. So it wasn't really lasting and meaning and abiding in the way that I would wanted it. It was a moment of what I might call divine intervention. Later, I came to discover that it was mostly that my mind was finally quiet for a little while. It's like when you really get serious about, contemplating the end of your life, you often find that, well, that will be the end of my life, but it's also the end of my problems, right? Which is often what drives people to even contemplate or consider suicide, is they want or believe or feel and hope that it's the end of their problems. But so when I came to the sort of end of my problems in my head, I came to the end of thinking, there's nothing to figure out at that point. There's nothing to worry about. There's nothing really to even hope for. There's just, quiet. So in that stillness and silence, I found a moment of respite, and solace and comfort and just peace. And it took me a while to really understand that that's what exactly was going on there. But since then, I've done my best to sort of rinse, wash, and repeat that experience. But yeah, it wasn't an immediate recognition. And so it wasn't a lasting experience.
Hmm. The book, I want to jump ahead a little bit. The book Siddhartha, one of my absolute favorite books, has a line in it where he talks about like how the person seeking often misses what his goal is because he's so busy seeking and searching and striving that he doesn't like stop to discover what's there. So I'm curious, that feeling of love and peace and, maybe a baseline happiness, should that be our baseline, or is that something we need to go out and find?
So to your point, first, I'll say you're absolutely right that, I discovered, and I think this is true of practically everyone, that you're not unhappy because you don't have what you want. You're unhappy because you want what you do not have.
I love that.
Right? Or what you think you do not have. And there's levels and layers to that. The first level and layer is like, well, look at your objective conditions and circumstances. Do you have a roof over your head? Do you have running water? Do you have utilities? Do you have clothes and shelter? Do you have friends and family? Do you have working organs? Are you healthy? All these things are things to be grateful for, right? And not because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the happy thing to do. Beyond that, there's also sort of something underneath all of that, which is like, well, you've got creative faculties and you have the ability to think, you have the ability to choose your thoughts or to think about things that make you feel good when you think about them. Just because something is true doesn't mean that you have to think about it, especially if it makes you miserable, especially if you can't control it, right? So there's the second level there around thoughts, but then there's a third level, which is like underneath all of the experiences of your life and underneath all those thoughts is this like lasting, meaningful, and abiding peace and love and happiness that most of us don't tap into, right? And so you have to sort of learn and practice that. Like, how do you tap into and turn on to this like infinite, eternal pull of happiness and peace and love that's inside of you? And that requires real practice. So I know I may have skipped your ultimate question, but I wanted to provide a little context there.
No, that's great. I'm so glad you went there. I would love to talk about some of the techniques and things that we can do, practically to achieve that a little bit more in our lives. But before we do that, I want to go back to your story. When did you decide that this could be a career? I don't recall seeing happy as part of my college curriculum. That wasn't offered to me. Tell us a little bit about that decision and the program you did. Sounds so interesting.
So true, brother. I struggled a lot with figuring out what I wanted to do with my life, like what I want to do when I grow up. And I read every book I could find on the topic for like 10 years, and it wasn't really helping. And, I was sort of praying for purpose. And what's interesting is, like most things in our lives, it's usually right under our nose. And that purpose that I eventually came to discover, which was being a happiness coach, came the sort of long scenic route. It also came through really struggling with this problem of unhappiness, right? So I think often our greatest problems point to our greatest purpose, right? So whatever you really struggle with often is pointing the way sort of out into something more, to a more purpose-driven life. And that was the case with me. So I was trying to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. The whole time, I really kind of became obsessed with psychology studies about happiness and about depression and about peace and about love. And I just kept doing this thing, which was pulling on this thread of happiness and finding all kinds of material and people to talk to who were in the psychology field or spirituality space or maybe philosophers. It didn't matter, anyone who wanted to talk to me about happiness. And in the meantime, I was working a management consulting job I did not like. In fact, I quite deeply disliked, but I love the people. And at some point, I decided I was going to go back to graduate school, really to get my MBA. And I decided I didn't want to do the consulting anymore. I had an option there. They said, hey, Rob, you can either, I had taken an internal position. They said, you can go back to the consulting work you were doing, which we don't think you love so much, or you can find a job somewhere else. I was like, well, I'm going to find a job somewhere else. I thought it wouldn't be a problem. And then later I discovered that as I was going to business school, which I needed to pay for, I really struggled to find a corporate job again. I didn't really want one anyway. And so then I started the entertainment stuff. That's when I just sort of fell into the modeling. I met an agent on Lincoln Road in South Beach because I had moved from Philadelphia to Miami. And he just said, hey, have you ever modeled before? And I thought for sure he was pulling my leg because I was like, in my head, I'm like the ugliest guy in the world. I could not possibly model, you know what I mean? And then a week later, it happened again with a different agent and I really needed the money. So I was like, well, I'll just go in there and who knows, maybe I'll fool them for a week, or whatever. And they'll get me through another week, but it turned into a 10-year career. But that whole time, I still was focusing on the happiness thing. And then only later was I like, you know what? I just love this thing so much. I would love to talk to people about it every day and maybe write about it and help people also discover this inherent, innate happiness that they have inside. And so only slowly but surely did it become a career where I started getting paid for it. Before that, though, it was a career in the sense that it was really taking up the bulk of my time, energy, and attention because I loved it so much.
In what capacity do you work with people primarily? Is it a lot of one-on-one work? I know you work with both individuals and organizations, but what is your preferred way to work with somebody?
Yeah, so I have been working, I have a private practice. I've been working with folks for about 20 years on a one-on-one basis. But lately I've been scaling up more and more because I do really love the idea of touching more people, helping more people with the same amount or even less time, energy, and effort. And so I do both, but I've been quickly scaling out of the one-on-ones.
And what kind of patterns do you notice with most people? Like, what are some common things that you have to work with people actively to get them to start thinking about things differently?
Yeah, great question, Casey. So I kind of work with I guess maybe 3 or 4 different populations of people. It's like entertainers or aspiring entertainers, athletes, executives, and then sort of everyday people like myself. And, it's interesting because the language sometimes is different, but the essence of those conversations is the same. So with, let's say, athletes, we might talk about flow state. And with the executives, we'll call it executive presence. And with the entertainers, we might call it confidence or charisma. But ultimately, we're talking about a deep felt sense of peaceful aliveness where you're authentically yourself, fully self-expressed, and just loving it, enjoying it, right? And so, really, ultimately, all the conversations lead back to a conversation that really revolves around happiness. But we often get there through different means and methods. And I like to meet people where they are. So sometimes people say, I'm struggling with my partner, or I'm struggling with because I don't have a partner, because I would love to have a boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, or I wish I was making more money. And so I'll meet them there. But ultimately, I want to take them a lot deeper so that we don't just solve for this one problem they're facing now, but we can sort of solve for all problems that they could ever face by helping them realize that the true power they're looking for and the true abundance they're looking for is always within.
Were you surprised at all working with some of these just super high performing people that we would look up to and maybe think to ourselves like, they're rich, they're famous, they've got everything made. Were you surprised at all by whatever level of unhappiness you uncovered?
Great question. I don't know if I was surprised by that part because I had been reading about so many successful public figures, celebrities that were so unhappy that they were brought to the brink of, and sometimes beyond, suicide, right? So I was very familiar with that. And, being in the entertainment space and talking to a lot of models and some actors and stuff like that, I was quite, familiar with the struggles that all of us face just because of the fact that we're human beings, right? Now, what I was sort of mostly or more surprised by, however, was the ways in which a seemingly charmed life where you maybe have inherited a lot of money and maybe you had great parents and maybe everything seemed to go so well, how often that could set you up for so much more pain and suffering later. That was a surprise to me. It's like really hard to appreciate small things when your life has been filled with, platinum and gold and silver all the time, right? And so I discovered that was that was what shocked me the most, that sometimes what we think of as a blessed or charmed or perfect life is, or seems to be, almost more challenging and almost more cursed than a much tougher one where you have to fight tooth and nail for everyone or for everything. So that was kind of surprising. I think we all suffer. The point is we all suffer, and we might suffer in seemingly different ways. But ultimately, I think the solutions are very similar.
Interesting. That's such a great point. I see that all the time around here. I'm in a pretty affluent suburb of Salt Lake City. We're the plastic surgery capital of the world. More people get procedures done here than anywhere else. And it seems like the more we take care of our little problems that humans should have, we make more problems up that then become those like first world problems. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Casey, that's so beautifully said, brother. Like, I just love these conversations with you. Yes, that's exactly it. Like, there was a spiritual teacher and there was a documentary made after him, but he had some very profound things to say. His name was Osho. And, one of the things he would say is, he said, "Oh, I don't care about your problems. I don't care about your troubles. I want to kill the troublemaker itself," right? And the troublemaker itself is like your mind, right? So we're wired with all these biases, essentially, that are wired into the brain. And a good example of one of those is like a negativity bias, right? So there's a tendency for our brain to look for problems to solve, to look for threats to address so that we can stay alive. The brain is built for survival, not necessarily happiness, right? And so, of course, the likelihood of you being happy goes up exponentially if you can stay alive, right? So that being said, it can be often challenging to sort of recognize and navigate the brain's biases, particularly negativity bias, in ways that allow you to also be happy. And so we all are challenged by, but also have an opportunity for the same kind of happiness, just as we address this troublemaker, which is the brain or the mind itself, and not try to simply play this game of whack-a-mole, which is like fixing problems in the world or problems in your life all the time. Sure, you want to fix things that are or seem broken in your life, but if you think that it's by fixing problems in your life that you'll find peace or happiness, you're going to be wrong about that, right? Because the brain, the mind, will just find more problems to solve. And if it can't find more problems to solve, it will create them. And to you, they will seem real. They will seem like they need your time, energy, and attention. And you have to put happiness on hold yet again until you get this problem solved. And so you're right about that, Casey. It's tempting to make your life about self-improvement. But if you don't make your life about self-enjoyment and self-acceptance as well, you will find that the self-improvement never makes up for or compensates for a lack of self-enjoyment or self-acceptance.
Wow, man, just one more example of us changing our environment in so many amazing and cool ways. I mean, we're talking between, time zones, bouncing a satellite signal into outer space and back to have this conversation, which is way cool. But all of these things are creating such a level of comfort that you're right. Like the brain that used to have to periodically run away from a tiger and sort out a real problem now is left to sort out, somebody cuts you off in traffic and you freak out, or somebody says something on Twitter and you freak out. Like it's the environment. And I wanted to know for you, like all of these comforts that we have, which again are amazing, but they make it so we eat mushy food. We always live in 72 degrees. If anything's uncomfortable, we can generally do something about it. Does that create an innate sense of unhappiness because we're not like solving real problems?
Sure, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, it can sort of put you in a space and a place where you're sort of numbed out, right? On one hand. On the other is that it can sort of begin to erode your resilience, right? If everything, if you live in comfort all the time and you're used to being or existing and living in your comfort zone, then the likelihood of you wanting to or forcing yourself or challenging yourself to step outside of the comfort zone to improve something in a real meaningful way, not just the objective conditions of your life, but maybe the quality of your life, maybe the subjective well-being of your life. So your internal state, it seems to be less and less likely, and you seem to have less and less strength or resilience to do so. So absolutely, you're right. I mean, we live in a more sort of technologically advanced and connected world, and yet we all feel less connected to each other. We live longer lives, but we often live less deep ones, sort of more shallow lives in a way, right? Our lives are filled with material goods and comforts, and services that our grandparents would be absolutely astounded by. And yet we exist in increasingly sort of emotionally and psychologically, spiritually bankrupt ways, right? Like on the inside. And so you're right about that. I think all of that plays into it. And at the end of the day, I think the solutions ultimately end up the same, which is like, you don't have to torture yourself on the way to happiness. You don't have to put yourself in pain and discomfort on purpose. I believe the quote unquote work that we all talk about doing, which will lead to a more peaceful and happier, joyful life, can be joyful work and can be enjoyable work and can be work that feels more like play than work. But it does require you to make different choices and different decisions. And initially, because they're less familiar to you and less practiced, it can feel a little uncomfortable.
So my favorite book is called The Untethered Soul. It talks a little bit about
and I love that book.
Oh, it's great. It's an awesome book. It talks about how you shouldn't have to go and like you just alluded to, you don't need to suffer through. You don't need to look for problems. You just kind of address the problems as they come up. But there's an entire chapter on happiness that I really love. And it is asking a very simple question, which is, do you want to be happy? Is happiness, you mentioned decisions. Is happiness a decision that we need to make?
Yes. It's something you want to choose. It's something you get to choose every moment of every day, right? And the beautiful thing about it is this. At some point in time, once you continue choosing it, just like a partner or just like anything else in your life that you choose, it gets easier and easier, right? So they say that with practice, after about 21 to 66 days, your brain begins to rewire itself for whatever it is you're choosing. So it's kind of like the algorithm of the brain, right? There's an algorithm on Instagram and on Amazon. Once you start choosing something, before you know it, it starts choosing you over and over again. And so the brain and happiness works very much the same way. You start choosing it consistently enough, and it seems to start choosing you back, right? It becomes more sort of an easier, less effortful experience for you. So yeah, the challenge with an opportunity for all of us is that we've practiced thinking and choosing in ways that doesn't always or mostly support our happiness or our self-love or our peace. And so it does require an intentional and committed pivot to choose happiness on a daily and even momentary basis, right? And so one way to do that is just to begin noticing and start choosing to vet your thoughts, not based on whether or not they're true, but based on whether or not they're helpful. So it's easy to say that just because something is true, you should focus on it and think about it. Well, if it's not supporting you in making a change about it, or it's not supporting you in feeling happier or healthier or wealthier from the inside out, then you're just ruining your life in the moment. You're pre-paving a future for yourself. It's also going to make it easier and easier to choose this less healthy, happy, harmonious thought, right? And so choosing thoughts that are true but better feeling is ultimately a decision that works not only for your happiness, but also works with respect to success. Because we know happy people make more money over the course of their entire lifetime, about $600,000 to $700,000 on average, more than unhappy people. They live 6 to 7 years longer than unhappy people. They get married earlier, stay married longer, and happier in all their relationships, whether they're married or not.
Wow.
They experience job burnout. All these things are, strongly correlated with an increasingly happy life, right? So I always joke and say, happiness isn't only the greatest success, because it's what you want success for, but it also leads to success.
I love that. What a cool technique, and something that is free and accessible. Anybody could do it. Any listener right now could take their situation, whatever's going on in their life, and they could apply it and ask about themselves about their thoughts and say, is this really helping me or not? I really love that. Earlier, you talked about craving or wanting, and maybe like wanting the wrong things that don't lead to happiness. So that quote was amazing. If you could repeat it again, I would love that. And then how do we choose where to anchor our wanting and our cravings in a way that helps set us up for success and happiness?
Wow, really awesome questions, Casey. I love those questions so much. So, first, that quote is, you're unhappy not because you don't have what you want, but because you want what you do not have. So that's the first thing. And that doesn't mean that you can't set goals, have dreams or desires for bigger, better things in your life. That's great. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. but you want to make sure that you're rooted and planted in the present moment, that you're deeply enjoying the present moment. Not only will that enhance, of course, the happiness in your life, but also it's going to prepave a much easier, more effortless experience and journey to success. So it will feel like a journey of success. So the entire journeys can be successful instead of just being the destination being a successful one. So that's the first thing. In terms of desire, that can be a tough one for lots of people. Science has helped us a lot clarify what does and doesn't tend to add to the happiness of our lives. We know that for the most part, when it comes to purchases, you're better off purchasing experiences, particularly with folks that you feel connected with. There's just so much more happiness that most of us derive from experiences as opposed to conspicuous consumption, for instance, okay? Relationships is the other space in place. And it doesn't mean romantic relationships. I actually think friendship is the highest form of love. And friendship within the context of romantic relationships, ideally too. But relationships matter a great deal, a lot more than people think and feel. So those are the two things for sure. The other thing I've discovered is that we're all different. So while happiness is a science and you want to lean into science, it's also an art, right? So you want to check for yourself what purchases, and you can do sort of close study or little forensics on your past purchases or past decisions that you made in your life, and ask yourself, what has truly, deeply led me to live an increasingly happy life, like in a lasting, meaningful, and abiding way? And for me, I have to say, well, I just certainly love books, and we know that exercise is also a great choice that you make. It increases your happiness in addition to your health. So lots of ways science will add to the conversation, but you also want to check your own experience and really turn it into an art, something that you personalize and customize for yourself. Finally, I would say that, so one way we can talk about this is calling it happiness islands. So look at the things, people, places, and activities that allow you to feel most inspired, excited, alive, and track them, and then try to integrate them more and more into life. And on the flip side, identify your happiness values. Those are things, people, places, activities that don't bring you a lot of happiness. Maybe they drain you. They certainly don't energize you. Or even if you enjoy them a little bit, they seem to come with a lot of either negative consequences or side effects or almost a hangover effect. You want to do everything you can to outsource, delegate, reduce, or eliminate as many happiness values in your life. So that's one of the best activities in order to get clear around what's really worth wanting or choosing versus what isn't.
Wow. Man, I mean, that's such a good way. I think most people would realize if they're thinking that way, Christmas morning wasn't as good as you thought it was going to be, but Christmas Eve was where all the magic was. It was the anticipation. It wasn't actually getting the thing that you thought you wanted. Do most people realize that?
That's absolutely right. I would say that most of us have fleeting moments where we do recognize that we have that sort of expectation hangover effect. It's like, oh man, I finally got the house of my dreams. And it's great for 3 months or 4 months or sometimes 3 years, but quickly the excitement and the novelty fades. So we call that the hedonic treadmill, right? Which is the idea that it's not that experiences or purchases can't bring you pleasure, but that pleasure fades faster than you think it will. And it also often doesn't bring you quite as much. So people will say, do you think this car will give you, well, how many happiness points do you think this car will give you out of 10? And they'll say, well, I know that it'll probably fade in time. And I don't know, I wouldn't give it a 10, but maybe a 7. And then they get the car and it's like maybe a 6. And then you also ask them before they bought the car, how long do you think that happiness will last, or that pleasure will last? And they'll say, probably a good 9 months or a year. And then you check in 6 months and they're like, well, it's already begun to fade. I've kind of forgotten about it and I like it and I enjoy it, right? So it's like we consistently underestimate how quickly pleasure and experiences and purchases will last. And we sort of overestimate how much happiness they'll provide.
I think that's a great way to think about those things. Very well explained. You mentioned exercise, and I'm going to give an example of ice cream. So eating ice cream, everybody loves to eat ice cream. It's really good. It's going to make you happy in that moment. Nobody really likes to exercise. It's painful and can be uncomfortable. How do we balance the reward of something in the short term versus something that we know would be better for us in the long term?
Oh, Casey, awesome question. So it's interesting. I'm one of those strange outliers because I love exercise. I will say without question, the highlight of my day, strangely enough, It's not 3:30 when I wake up. Okay. I don't initially right away think, oh yeah, it's 3:30. But I get up nonetheless, but I do a little meditation, I read, and I go to the gym at 5. That hour and a half or so at the gym is the highlight of my day. And the reason why I love that so much more than, let's say, the ice cream is it's sort of at least twofold. First, I have become I've worked on being less in my head and more in my body when I do things, especially when I do things that I think might be bad habits. I'm always working on that, never anywhere near perfect with that, but like eating ice cream, for instance, or some other food. If you can stay out of your head and out of the story that tells you this ice cream is the best thing in the world, and actually try to enjoy that ice cream much, much more slowly and much more deeply. So eat it real slow, stay out of your head, be in your body and the taste of it, the physical sensations. And you'll discover pretty quickly, first of all, you need less ice cream than you think you need. You often realize you don't even want ice cream. You might be thirsty. You might want something else. It's fine. But you recognize your satiety signals more quickly. And therefore, you don't kind of have that hangover or guilt or shame effect at the end, right? Because you know when to stop. The other thing is when you do the same thing, let's say with exercise, when I do it, I kind of use it almost as a meditative experience. And I love the physical benefits, but it's the psychological and emotional benefits that serve me in the greatest possible way. I do the same thing in terms of being in my body. And I notice that I actually really enjoy the sensations. That doesn't mean that the last rep isn't hard, but I feel so great for it, both during and after. And I've realized with the ice cream, for instance, I do enjoy it. I'm lactose intolerant, which is even more troublesome for me. But right, it's the after effect, particularly around the ice cream, that I've discovered just doesn't. So the more you can have that experience, like a visceral experience, like a bodily experience where you're like, oh, I enjoyed the first 5-6 spoonfuls, but the last 20 were just kind of like, and then the last 5 really weren't great at all. And the last 2, I felt sick. The more you start getting in touch with that without trying to change anything, you're not trying to be, so moral or any of those things. You're just getting in touch with the wisdom of the body. You quickly discover that things that are bad for you, you're just like, I don't want to do that anymore. Yeah. It doesn't mean you won't fall into it again. And then things are good for you. You tend to find that they actually do, for the most part, feel good when you're doing them.
Wow. Yeah, it's so self-regulating. I notice the same thing with my clients. It's like, look, I hate when you call it a cheat, call it a treat. When you have it, make it count. Like have a really good version of whatever you want. Don't do some like healthy quote unquote version of ice cream that tastes like ice. Like go have some really good ice cream and really enjoy it. And just understand like, yeah, your sleep might suck. Your energy might suck. You might not have, a desire to work out the next day like you would if you avoided it. But then just make that as infrequent as possible. And I love that you said, eat that food really mindfully so that you really enjoy it when you have it. And then like do that, every now and again. Don't do a sleeve of Oreos every afternoon. Like,
yes.
you can choose those things and explore those experiences. I love the way you explain that. That's very well said. I would like to talk to you a little bit about happiness in relationships. How can we help foster an environment of happiness for our significant others and the people that we live with?
Yeah. So the key to love is self-love, right? The cheat code to love is self-love. And so you want to start really with loving yourself. It just sounds like such a cliche, but cliches become cliches for a reason. When you start to truly love and accept yourself for who you are, you automatically start loving and accepting other people for who they are. And then the magic and the miracle of that is that when you start loving other people for who they are, they start loving you back for who you are. And it doesn't always come from the same people that you shared or expressed that love to, but you get it back nonetheless. And you get it back in increasing fashion, in disproportionate sums, right? So the love you get out is a little bit here, but then you get it back so much more. And so another way of saying that is, one way to describe loving yourself, it's finding happiness within. It means finding this unconditional happiness that doesn't depend and isn't contingent on what you have or what you do or who else does or doesn't love you. It's like I can tap into this source anytime I want. It's like being infinitely wealthy. It's like I have the PIN code. I just go to the bank anytime I want. I don't need anyone else to do this for me. Sure, it's great. I prefer if people love and accept me. Sure. And I don't need it. So when you're able to kind of, or learn to enjoy your aloneness, you're able to so much better enjoy your togetherness, and other people are able to enjoy their togetherness with you as well, right? And so the way I put it is, when you find love within yourself, you find it with everybody else, even when they don't find it with you. Another way of saying it is, when you find happiness within yourself, you find it with everybody else as well, even when they don't find it with you. So the key again really is finding this infinite eternal source of happiness and love within yourself, and then sort of filling yourself up with as much peace, love, and joy as humanly possible, or recognize that you're already full with it. And then it's like a rain cloud. A rain cloud becomes so full of moisture that it at some point can't contain itself any longer, and it just showers. It just rains down on the whole earth and on all living creatures indiscriminately, unconditionally, without an expectation of reciprocity. And it does it just to relieve itself. It's a perfectly selfish motive. It's a perfectly selfish agenda. Same deal with love. It's like, if you can get to the place where it's like you love people, not for them, but for you, because it just feels so good, it's a game changer.
Wow. Dude, I wish you could see me right now. I've got the biggest grin on my face. I absolutely love that visual. And if we go back to thinking about maybe happiness as a decision, or choosing the things that we want and where we're placing our value, this is a really stoic concept of like trying to find the things that we can control versus putting our happiness in things that we can't control. So if I choose to be a happy person, I decide that I'm going to be happy and I'm going to be loved and I'm going to explore that myself. I maybe can't make somebody love me back, but I can control being a loving person and then in turn attract that love back. And so I love it. It's such a cool concept. Yeah, it's just
it's so well said. Man, so well said.
If you can find the things that you are 100% in control of, you control your values, you control the way your brain works, and you put your value there, you're right. Like there's no way you can't be unhappy because that's what you've chosen and it's in your control.
That's so exactly. And the key and the challenge and the opportunity there is like, once you've clarified, defined what you want or what your values are, you don't want to force other people to meet your expectations now, right? It's like they're my expectations, so they're for me to fulfill. And other people have their expectations, and those for their expectations are for them to fulfill. And so that's part of the challenge and opportunity here is like, happiness is my job, and your happiness is your job. And I'll do what I can to support you in every way with that happiness. And it's so much easier to support you in your happiness if I'm already happy. But if it's like, I'm a beggar, I have no happiness, and you're a beggar and you have no happiness, and then we get together, it's just two beggars that have nothing to share with each other, and it just makes each other worse and worse off, right? And so you don't want to be that. I think you want to learn to be sort of a king in happiness. You can be an emperor in love, or be sort of a queen in happiness, so you can be an empress in love. I think it's just critical.
Wow, I love that. It seems to me that one of the most loving things we can do, especially within a relationship, is to just every now and again shut up and listen and not try to do what I do every single time, which is you tell me a problem, I'm going to try to rush in and fix everything. And my wife always has to tell me like, no, doofus, I'm not telling you to fix my problems. I just need to complain about my day for a second. I need to vent. I don't need you to step in and fix my problems. Why is listening such a critical part of happiness and richness in our relationships?
Wow, Casey, and you're not alone there, brother. Okay, I would say lots of us and lots of guy friends, especially that I know, really struggle with that. We tend to be fixers, and a lot of us were raised to be fixers, and we have been raised to be performers, right, as well. And that's how we have sort of shown our value and demonstrated our interest in something. So it comes, with the territory often for many of us, men and women. Listening is extraordinarily powerful. There's a number of reasons. I always assumed that when I became a coach, I was in the business of behavior change. I've since been disabused of that idea. I'm not in the behavior change game. I'm in the listening game. And I will offer up tips, tricks, tools, direction, advice, and guidance when I can. But I've discovered that most people don't come looking for advice. They come looking for an accomplice. They want a friend. And so most people are just wanting to be seen and heard and felt and understood. And they want all of that without judgment, right? And so if you can do that, they feel love. I mean, that's one way of actually describing or defining love. It's non-judgmental or unconditional regard. right? And we feel it most deeply when someone's just holding space for us, right? Now, if they're interested, you can always go beyond and help and in other ways and support and help even to fix things if necessary or if that's their desire. But it's tough. There's an expression which I've always loved, which I try to remember, which is the only thing freely given and never taken is unsolicited advice, right? So just critical. But listening has two levels to your point. Like the first level is like, it's really about presence, right? That's the other piece is when you're listening, people feel really present, that you're present. And the two levels of listening is like, first, it's keeping your mind where your body is. That's the first thing. Try not to interrupt verbally or mentally. And that sort of brings us to the second level, which is like kind of keeping your mind quiet and cool and collected when and as you're listening, which can be tough, right? But that's critical. The people who can do that often experience transformation, either in the context of the relationship or for the other person without even trying. In fact, a lot of well-known healers healed just by doing that, right? And we also know that the most, I guess, sort of resourceful or helpful therapists in the world, they've done studies and they found that it doesn't matter what school of thought or school of psychology the therapist applies. Instead, it's more about the therapist's ability to hold space and exercise unconditional regard. When they do that well, when they listen deeply and fully and attentively without judgment, the situation often changes or transforms on its own.
Wow. That is so powerful. I did not know that, but that makes 100% sense to me. What an amazing gift we can offer other people. And you're right. I'm glad you made the point. Like, how often are we having a conversation and we're just rushing ahead to think of the next thing we're going to say rather than listening to that person finish their thought and receive that?
That's right. We're often not listening. We're just waiting to talk again.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah, Casey. And I can feel that you do this really well, even though I know you have your moments like we all do where you want to fix, and that's coming from a really pure, honest heart. You clearly have practiced this mindful ability, this mindful listening ability, and it shows up in all these conversations.
Well, yeah, thank you very much. It's a challenge. You know, it's really tough. Like I want to get a cape made that I can just throw my cape on every time there's a problem with somebody and go in and fix. But you're right. Like often that's not needed. It's not even wanted. It's just the ability to be there, be present with somebody and just receive whatever they have to give. We've talked a lot about connection and living in a very much more disconnected world. We know that, you know, we've had a hell of a year, 2020 and the pandemic and everybody going inside. And there's been a lot of, increasing suicide and depression, anxiety before all of this happened. With the younger generation, how can we be thinking about them in a context of caretaking or parenting? How can we help this generation who is already very challenged with some of these things grow and find their own happiness? Do the same techniques work with them?
Absolutely, Casey. Great segue. Yes, listening. You want to listen. Just listen for a while. Try, seek to understand before you seek to be understood, right? Try to understand and listen and listen with curiosity and listen without judgment and just listen, right? I think that's a huge piece of it. Also, and this might be even more important or just as important as listening, I would say is really wanting to be the change that you want to see in your partner or your kids, especially. I think we're better off showing people than telling them. And you can show them through your living, shining example better than you can tell them through your words. And so that means that if your teenager or child is struggling with, let's say, stress or anxiety or anger, you want to be the peace that they're ultimately after. And you want to be able to be that peace in an unconditional way so that you're always showing up as peace, despite them showing up as something that seems like non-peace, right? If you can do that consistently and meet them where they are and listen, and that doesn't mean you can't set boundaries. It doesn't mean that there aren't effects or consequences for actions that they take or behaviors that, they are taking. You will find pretty quickly that your living, shining example of peace begins to become contagious. It's infectious. And that's why we say, well, happiness is your gift to the world. Happiness is your gift to your kids. Your happiness is your gift to your kids. And really, your happiness shared is love. Your peace shared is love. And we all try so hard to get it right as parents. And, we don't need to be perfect and we don't need to be anything near perfect. And we often struggle ourselves with finding peace or happiness or love. and letting your kids know that and see that a little bit so they can see you work your way back up the emotional scale after you have a challenging moment is actually extraordinarily illuminating for those kids. So you don't need to be perfect. You want to be confidently vulnerable, and you want to make it very clear that you are committed to living a life of peace and of happiness and joy and love. And you're doing it for you, not just everybody else in the world. And if you're serious about it and you really mean it, you'll be surprised at how, first of all, things that used to bother you so much no longer do. Second, you put yourself in a much more creative mindset and make yourself a much better problem solver. So when kids actually need help, you're really effective in your help. But then three, you just offer an environment and a space where this happiness and peace and love becomes contagious. And then it begins to have a ripple effect beyond even your kids, beyond even your friends, beyond even your family. We know that emotion is the most contagious element on the planet. You can pass it through a laptop, through a cell phone, through a glance. You can send it across the world in no time, just by a text message. So it's important to remember that you want to be the change that you want to see in other people.
Man, I love that. I was fortunate to grow up in the house that I did, and we saw many examples of this, especially with my mom, who's now passed away. But she was such a great example of creating a happy place, but she would do it with service. And I learned the lesson pretty early on that if I'm ever not feeling very happy, a really easy way for me to start feeling a little bit more happy, a little bit better about myself is go out and serve, go do something that helps somebody else. Can you talk a little bit about the mechanism of how that works?
Absolutely. Wow, Casey. I love that so much. And I can feel you living your mom's legacy through service. We know that happy people are more service oriented, meaning they are more charitable, they're kinder, they're more generous, they donate more time, money, energy, blood, right? Than unhappy people. But also, it's this like positive upward spiral and feedback loop, because not only do happy people ultimately more charitable and kind and generous and all those things, but also being more charitable and kind and generous and service oriented also makes you happier, right? So they kind of you just get this really awesome positive feedback loop and upward spiral. So yeah, that's just critical, and I think, of course, the part of the challenge and opportunity there is to do it from, and you can put it in two different ways. One is you can say, do it from a really selfless place, which means do it from a place where you don't expect a reward, even a thank you. And if you find yourself checking for that, just notice that maybe your intentions might be off a little. And I say that not just because it's the right thing to do, but just because it's going to let you enjoy the experience so much more. It's going to let everybody else enjoy the experience so much more. And you're not going to carry around this resentment for having done something that was supposed to be service-oriented and out of the kindness of your heart, but you actually realized was driven by the ego, right? So the other way to say it, so first way is be selfless about it. The other way to say it is be perfectly selfish about it. And by that, I just mean, make sure you're doing it because you enjoy it so darn much, right? Not because you want to be a good person. That obviously is great. Yeah, be a good person. But you have to be careful of the ways in which sometimes the ego just sneaks its way in to even volunteer work, to even peace work, right? It slips in there. And before you know it, it's like it pollutes the very service that you're offering up. So yeah, just two ways of saying the same thing. The idea ultimately is do it deep inside because you love doing it so much and because it makes you happy, and do it without an expectation of reciprocity if you can. And you'll find that your work is much more effective and much more productive and much more enjoyable.
That's great advice. I love that. I think it was an ancient Roman philosopher who was quoted as saying, if you make a hospital visit and it doesn't pop up on Instagram, did you actually go visit that hospital?
That's so true. Dude, absolutely. It's interesting that way, isn't it?
It sure is. We've already talked a little bit about fitness and health, and I think that's such it's like an undivorceable, kind of, it goes along with happiness really, really well, hand in hand, in my opinion. You mentioned going to the gym is something that makes you really happy. You mentioned meditation. What other things in the health and fitness world do you leverage to help make your life richer and happier?
Yeah. So I still love running. I used to run as a young boy. I would run. My dad made me run cross country because he thought it would be good for me to like do an individualistic sport. And he was right. He turned out to be right. Parents often turn out to be right. And so I still run to this day, and I just get a high from running. Not every day. I don't get the high, but I get a high from running, without question. I also like being out in nature. I think that the stillness and silence of nature is also contagious. It allows me to tap into or recognize the stillness and silence within my own self, right? So I think that's extraordinarily helpful. Being near bodies of water are very helpful. I like being in the ocean, for sure. I'm a fire sign, so maybe there's something to do with that. But I just have found, being in nature and being active physically when I'm really struggling, even just going for a walk has been revolutionary for me. My mom used to call me when I was really struggling. She's like, "What's going on, honey?" And I didn't always tell her everything. And she would just say, "I think you just need to go for a walk." And I would sit there and think, "Mom, I've got all these other problems to deal with, so many problems, and they feel so real. And how's it going to solve any of that kind of, that was my kind of like response in my head. I wouldn't speak to all that, but I felt that way." And she'd say, "Well, I'm your mom. Can you just do it for me?" And I said, "Well, Mom, of course you asked me to do something for you. I'm going to do it." I would do it. And every time I come back feeling better, I'm like, "Mom, you're right again." So yeah, Casey, I mean, I love basketball. I played sports growing up. I still love sports, although I'm a lot more careful these days. Don't like the idea of pulling anything.
Sure.
Being active is just critical. Getting your body moving allows you to get your energy moving. And that sometimes is all you need to make it a great day.
I love that you mentioned walking. I cannot agree with you more that walking is so amazing, and most people they don't take enough time to do it, but especially if you can get out the early part of the day. I love what you said about bodies of water. We have a lake by our house. I walk by that lake every single day. And I can honestly say, like, that's where these podcasts come from. That's where our company started. That's where I think through problems and issues that I have. That's one of the very best things that came out of that pandemic, I have to say, is the time to be able to walk. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that. That's great.
I feel that. That resonates.
That's great. Dude, so you mentioned doing a little bit more group work, which sounds amazing. Tell us a little bit more about your coaching and your style and again, like what it would look like for people to work with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a bit of a waiting list, but I am always open and receptive to taking on clients and helping people out. I mean, honestly, I've gotten into this work just because I genuinely like the idea of being happy. I know how freaking hard it is. So freaking hard, right? And it can feel like impossible. And so to that end, I think it helps to have someone who's dedicated their life, all their time, energy, and effort to this one thing and helping you solve for this one thing. So I basically do that for individuals from all walks of life. I've kind of become known as a celebrity happiness coach. But all that means is that I was in the entertainment space for a while. And so I would often get referred out amongst, folks in the entertainment space. So I see people from all walks of life. It's mostly talking. I do it virtually. I also do it increasingly more and more in person again. And we talk for 30 to 45 or 60 minutes. I send out notes and homework assignments. I try to get people in and out of coaching as quickly as humanly possible. I love making money like everyone else, but I'm not interested in, I didn't get in this to make money. I did it and I do it because I want to see people happy. So I offer that and offer seminars and workshops, and we're going to be having more and more of those soon. And of course, I'm always writing books. So that's always a great place to find out more about sort of my philosophy on happiness and success is the book, Happiness from the Inside Out. But yeah, you can always reach out to me over social media, through my website at coachrobmack.com. On Instagram mostly, but all social media platforms at robmack, M-A-C-K official.
Gotcha, man. That's awesome. What a wide array of ways that people can help. And even if they just read your book, like that's a wonderful resource. And yeah, we couldn't agree more. Don't you just love getting fired by people because they got the results they wanted? It's the best.
Absolutely, Casey. I always tell my clients first time, I said, look, all you'll ever need is one session. Like if you just listen to everything I say, one session. I know it requires practice and nobody ever just sticks to one session, and I get it. I love it. It's fine. But my job is to make myself obsolete. And I remind them of that all the time, that if I can make myself obsolete, then I've done my job, because I want you to be your own best coach, not me.
That's amazing. I love that. We couldn't agree more. We tell our people that all the time. We love it. Oh man. So look back on your career and everything that you've done and accomplished, and the book. Can you identify something that you're the most proud of when you look back on everything you've done?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, not killing myself. That was like a big deal.
That's heavy.
Like, it's heavy, bro. It's really heavy. And also and I would say the other way I could say that in a much more positive way is just finding this infinite well of happiness inside. I think that I'm most proud about. without question. I mean, all my greatest achievements are internal, man. Like a lot of great things have happened in my life. I can't, and I don't really take credit for them. Yeah, I had the book, and yeah, I've done, a few TV shows since South Beach. I did Famously Single for 2 years, and I did Mind Your Business on Own, and I do a lot of consulting and production work for other shows and things like that. I'm writing more books, but honestly, dude, it's just the internal stuff. I'm like, am I a better person? And am I a happier person? Am I a more peaceful person? Am I a more loving person? Like, and not because I want to be a good person. It's not like I have this moral, ethical, imperative or prerogative. It's just like, it feels good. And I realize that, I'm living up to my own standards and expectations. And that's really about integrity, I suppose. Right. So I'm always working on that. And I'd say that's what I'm most proud about. Yeah, no question about it.
You can definitely tell that you have done the work to be able to say that, because it's flowing out of you, man. Like it's so obvious and apparent that you have done that work, and we're so grateful for you that you did not go through with your original plan, and that you felt that love and peace and decided to do what you do for your career. It's really quite amazing. We've covered so many different things. If you wanted to distill down that one session, that one thing, the one simple piece of advice you would give in summary, what would that one thing be?
Learn to just be. Learn to just be. You don't have to always be in your head. You don't have to always be thinking and figuring things out and fixing things or changing things. You can just be rooted in presence and grounded in God. You can call it that. But it's just being and not thinking, right? And the more you can sort of practice that, being and not thinking, the more you'll discover this happiness inside of you. And the more you'll discover all of the success that's ahead of you. So I would say, learn to just be.
I love that. That is so difficult. It's so hard in this world where it's not be, it's do. Go accomplish. It's always more, bigger, better, higher, more money. And you're right. It's so difficult. It's, something I've been talking about a lot lately is the word enough. Like when is the time of day when it's just everything you've done for that day is enough, and you need to stop working and you need to relax and just be and just think and all those things you mentioned. So I love that was your one thing to tell people. I think we need way more of that in our lives, even after, again, the year of kind of slowing down a little bit. Man, this has been a beautiful conversation. I've learned a ton. Again, your energy and optimism is just absolutely infectious. Tell us one last time, I know you already did, but tell us one last time where you want people to go to find you and your work.
Absolutely. In cases, just let me say, brother, it takes light to recognize light. And I cannot tell you, I have soul shivers this entire time. I get these shivers that tell me I'm connected with somebody at a soul level. And I felt that the entire conversation, man. It makes me feel emotional. I appreciate you so much. Clearly, you're not just talking the talk, you're walking the walk, man. And I really love you and appreciate you for that. So please know that, okay?
Wow. Thank you. Chills, dude.
Yeah, wow. For real. So yeah, if anybody's interested, you want help or you want a little bit of encouragement, you can go to coachrobmack.com. That's my website. You can check out my book, Happiness from the Inside Out, everywhere great books are sold, including Amazon and Barnes & Noble, online and in the store. And you can also find me on Instagram or any other social media platform at robmack, M-A-C-K, official.
Awesome. That is great. We will link to all of that in the notes. Man, what an absolute honor. Seriously, I've been vibing over here as well. Such a cool example. I'm so grateful for everything that you've done, and that you are same. You're not just talking the talk, you're walking the walk, and really leading by example and showing us how to be happier and to feel and express more love. So I can't thank you enough for all of that. I can't thank you enough for having that experience, the dark times that led to the light times, and your ability to share that message afterwards is just really empowering and inspiring. We're so grateful for you and so grateful for the time that you took to be on our show today.
Dude, you're a star. Keep shining, man. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. Likewise. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.